heard the story about the sacrifice? Now, brethren, you gotta keep to this. Who do you say that Jesus is? The Son of God, Christ, wrapped in flesh and meekness. Only by the Spirit of God can you believe this. The Spirit testifies about the blessed Christ. The Word speaks clear about what happened one night. The night before the day He was crucified. Dearly beloved, let's gather for the Last Supper. And my Lord told us He was gonna have to suffer and be betrayed by someone that walks among us. Couldn't believe that it was gonna be a brother. So caught up in grieving about Jesus, we didn't even notice Judas picking up and leaving to go sell Him out to the Pharisee leaders. Left His heart open for the devil to deceive it. Denied Christ for 30 silver pieces. Go on. He was despised and we did not esteem Him. Surely our griefs He Himself bore, and our sorrows He carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed Him stricken, smitten of God and afflicted. But He was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastising of our well-being fell upon Him, and by His stripes we are healed. Then Christ left the table with His brethren, paced to a place, then He prayed about His death. The deepest prayer ever prayed, He sweat and bled. Then He got up, fully devoted to drink the cup of His Father's wrath. The first and last, the Holy One, slaughtered lamb. He knew that Judas was approaching with soldiers and torches. Betrayed with a kiss, Judas, how could you do this to us? Jesus saw the Romans approaching and He asked, whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus the Nazarene. And He said, I am He. And they seized Him. They struck the good shepherd, then they took Him to a place. As the sheep scattered and they went the other way. Except for Peter, he followed Him at a distance, thinking that he would never deny His witness. They said Christ bound to the high priest's secrets. Peter was asked 3 times if he knew Jesus. As he denied the Lord for the 3rd time, Jesus turned around and He looked Him in His eyes. As the rooster crowed, Peter bitterly cried, wept and left the only God, Savior Christ. Now the soldiers mocked Jesus, blindfolded and beat Him, twisted together a thorn crown, saying, Hail, King of the Jews, as they pushed it down on His brow. Then when it was day, no doubt He was in pain. They left the priest council to see what Pilate would say. Pilate found Him innocent, not a sin in Him. But the people hated God, so they wanted Him crucified. They wanted to murder the truth and follow a lie. They wanted to murder the truth and follow a law. So Pilate had Him chastised, licked 39 times. So bloody and gory, it would blow your mind. Though He was the judge and the jury, He kept silent. But they treated Him like He was vicious, full of violence. Have you ever heard the story about the Christ? Have you ever heard the story about the sacrifice? Have you ever heard the story about the Christ? Have you ever heard the story about the sacrifice? Have you ever heard the story about the Christ? Have you ever heard the story about the sacrifice? Have you ever heard the story about the Christ? Have you ever heard the story about the sacrifice? After the Christ was proved innocent, after the Christ was beat to a pulp, after the Christ was left by His friends, after the Christ was denied